The crushing inflation, political hatred, and whispers of global war aren't random chaos. They are the mathematical symptoms of a 250-year-old death cycle. The empire has officially entered its final, brutal collapse. Watch until the end, because knowing what comes next is your only chance to survive. Look out your window. What do you see? A world unraveling? You feel it in your bones, the suffocating grip of inflation eating away at your hard-earned life, the venomous tribal hatred dividing your own community, the terrifying tremors of a geopolitical chessboard violently shaking as the United States and China lock eyes in a global death stare. The media feeds you a daily diet of unprecedented doom, and naturally, you feel a paralyzing sense of panic. But what if I told you that your fear is born from a profound, blinding illusion? What if I told you that absolutely none of this chaos is unprecedented? Before I pull back the curtain and show you the terrifying machinery that is actively deciding your future right now, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the absolute lifeblood of this channel, giving us the drive to keep exposing the hidden truths of our financial and historical reality in future videos. At Money Glow Up 02 warmly welcomes you to a journey that will forever shatter how you view the world. To grasp the brutal, unforgiving reality of the present moment, you have to strip away the deafening noise of the daily news cycle. You must force yourself to zoom out 500 years. When I look back at the cold, unapologetic data of modern history's 10 most dominant empires, most notably the Dutch, the British, and the American, and trace the lifelines of the 3 major reserve currencies that crowned them, a chillingly precise pattern stares right back at me. History is not some random sequence of chaotic, unlucky events. It is a highly mechanized engine. It is a merciless beast driven by the ruthless laws of cause and effect, fueled entirely by human psychology, insatiable greed, economic output, and crushing debt. This is the big cycle. It breathes, it turns, and it operates with relentless precision, crushing those who are blind to its massive gears while handsomely rewarding the few who can anticipate its violent rotations. Every great empire travels the exact same trajectory, a parabola. I watch these parabolas overlapping across centuries. As one colossal empire peaks and inevitably succumbs to the gravitational pull of its own decadence, a hungry challenger is already on an aggressive upward trajectory, sharpening its knives to usurp the throne. The lifespan of these monumental cycles averages about 250 years. But the most critical phase, the exact phase you and I are desperately trying to navigate right now, is the transition period. Do not fool yourself into thinking this transfer of global power happens peacefully over polite boardroom treaties. It is a 10 to 20-year window of excruciating, agonizing pain. It brings economic devastation and geopolitical chaos so profound it will test the very limits of human endurance. We are currently locked in a lethal game of Jenga, where every pulled block threatens to bring the entire global operating system crashing down into dust. The old world order is fighting a bloody, desperate battle to maintain its fading grip, while the rising power pushes with unapologetic force to rewrite the rules in its own image. If you do not wake up and understand the cold mechanics of this cycle, you will become nothing more than collateral damage in a historical transition that cares absolutely nothing for your personal survival. To understand how we arrived at this terrifying precipice, we must first look at how the Jenga tower was built in the first place, how a fledgling nation transforms into an untouchable global titan. When I study the ashes of fallen empires, I am always struck by the profound grit and raw determination of the survivors who build the new world order. They do not start at the top. They claw their way up from the absolute bottom. After a period of immense conflict or a devastating war, a new leadership emerges, bringing with it a fierce, uncompromising dedication to fundamentally rewriting the rules of society. The people of this rising power are forged in hardship. They do not demand luxury, they demand survival. And they understand that survival requires an unbreakable work ethic. I see a powerful, almost beautiful synergy take hold during this early phase. The state invests heavily in education and infrastructure, forging a populace that is not just literate, but highly skilled and fiercely competitive. Character, discipline, and duty to the collective future outweigh the selfish desires of the individual. Because they are working harder and learning faster than the rest of the world, they begin to innovate. They invent new technologies, they optimize production, and very quickly they manufacture the goods that the rest of the planet desperately needs to buy. They become the undisputed factory of the world. With this explosive surge in global trade comes immense wealth. But this wealth is not squandered on frivolous consumption. It is strategically reinvested. To protect their sprawling, lucrative trade routes, this rising empire inevitably builds a dominant military force. It is a necessary evolution. You cannot hold the world's wealth without the firepower to defend it. As global merchants realize this new empire is the safest, most productive, and most technologically advanced place on Earth, a psychological shift occurs. The world places its ultimate trust in this rising power. They begin to park their wealth in its financial institutions and conduct their transactions using its money. This is the holy grail of geopolitics. The moment a nation's fiat becomes the world's dominant reserve currency. It is a golden age of staggering prosperity, a time when the middle class thrives and the future looks boundlessly bright. But as I read through the diaries and ledgers of these historical golden eras, my heart always sinks, because I know what they didn't. The very success they bled to achieve is exactly what will eventually destroy them. But the very moment an empire achieves absolute global supremacy, a silent, intoxicating poison begins to seep into its cultural bloodstream. The transition from the ascent to the peak is deceptive, masked by towering skyscrapers, booming stock markets, and an overwhelming sense of invincibility. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, the foundation is beginning to rot. The generations that built the empire through blood, sweat, and sacrifice pass away, leaving the keys to the kingdom to their children and grandchildren, generations born into unprecedented privilege. They have never known the brutal sting of real hardship. Consequently, the cultural values quietly, tragically shift. The fierce work ethic that built the nation is replaced by an insatiable appetite for leisure and luxury. We stop wanting to produce, we only want to consume. As I analyze the economic data of empires at their zenith, a deeply disturbing trend always emerges. The nation loses its competitive edge. Because the citizens demand a higher standard of living, their labor becomes too expensive. The empire stops manufacturing the very goods that made it wealthy and begins importing them from cheaper, hungrier nations, ironically funding the rise of its eventual replacements. To maintain the illusion of infinite growth without actually doing the hard work of producing real value, the empire turns to the most dangerous drug known to human history: debt. The economy transforms from a powerhouse of engineering and manufacturing into a casino of financialization. The smartest minds no longer build bridges or cure diseases. They build complex algorithms to extract wealth from the stock market. This financial engineering accelerates a devastating side effect. The gap between the ultra-rich and the working class widens into an unbridgeable chasm. Those closest to the money printer multiply their fortunes effortlessly, while the average citizen finds their wages stagnating and their cost of living soaring. As the empire desperately tries to fund its bloated domestic entitlement programs and its sprawling, overextended military bases across the globe, it realizes it cannot simply tax its citizens enough to pay the bills. So, the central bank commits the ultimate betrayal. They begin to print money out of thin air. They debase the currency. Every new dollar, guilder, or pound printed is a silent theft, systematically draining the purchasing power of the working class's savings. The elites look down from their penthouses and see a booming economy, completely blind to the fact that on the streets below, the financial strain is brewing a toxic, explosive resentment that cannot be contained. When the illusion of endless prosperity shatters and the currency loses its purchasing power, the empire turns its rage inward, cannibalizing its own people. This is the phase that breaks my heart the most, because it is the phase where neighbor turns against neighbor, and the shared identity of a once great nation dissolves into bitter, warring tribes. The economic pain we explored earlier does not just stay on a spreadsheet. It manifests as a visceral, agonizing human suffering. The middle class, once the stabilizing bedrock of the society, is hollowed out and pushed toward poverty. When people cannot afford to feed their families or buy a home despite working exhausting hours, they stop believing in the system. They feel profoundly betrayed, and rightfully so. This deep sense of betrayal creates a dangerous vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Into this void step the populists and the political extremists from both the far left and the far right. They recognize the anger of the masses, and they weaponize it. They point fingers at each other, at the wealthy, at the immigrants, at the establishment, screaming that the other side is not just misguided, but inherently evil. The political center completely collapses. I watch this happen time and time again in the historical record. Compromise becomes a dirty word, viewed as treason by the radicalized fringes. The media infrastructure, desperate for attention and profit, feeds this hysteria, creating echo chambers that strip away all nuance and truth. Soon, the institutional pillars of the society, the courts, the elections, the law enforcement, the schools, lose all credibility. Half the country believes these institutions are rigged against them, while the other half wields them as weapons against their political enemies. This isn't just political disagreement. It is an existential crisis of truth. When citizens can no longer agree on a shared set of basic facts, governance becomes entirely paralyzed. The system is so clogged with bureaucratic rot and partisan hatred that it cannot pass a budget, let alone solve the massive, looming crises threatening the nation. Protests spill into the streets, morphing into riots, violence, and the terrifying whispers of civil war. The empire becomes so utterly consumed by its own domestic inferno that it entirely loses sight of the horizon, leaving its gates wide open and undefended. As the dying empire bleeds out from its self-inflicted wounds, a new, disciplined predator watches from the shadows, knowing the perfect moment to strike has finally arrived. This is the final, brutal chapter of the Big Cycle. While the incumbent power was busy tearing itself apart over cultural grievances and printing worthless money to fund its decadence, the rising power was executing the exact blueprint of ascent we discussed at the very beginning. They have educated their masses, built an industrial juggernaut and amassed immense technological and military capabilities. Now they look across the ocean at the reigning hegemon and see not a terrifying giant, but a bloated, exhausted old man staggering under the weight of insurmountable debt. The rising power no longer accepts a subordinate role in global affairs. They begin to aggressively project their power, testing the boundaries, building new alliances, and quietly convincing the rest of the world to abandon the old system. This is the Thucydides trap in its purest, most terrifying form. The declining empire, desperate to maintain its prestige and terrified of losing its absolute control, attempts to push back. We see this manifest first as economic warfare, tariffs, trade embargoes, and the weaponization of the global financial system. Then come the proxy wars, where the two titans fund opposing sides in smaller, distant conflicts to test each other's resolve and drain each other's resources. The tension ratchets up to a suffocating level, and the risk of a direct, catastrophic military confrontation hangs over the globe like a loaded gun. But often, the final blow is not delivered on a physical battlefield. It is delivered in the bond markets. The rest of the world, watching the chaos, the inflation, and the internal rot of the incumbent empire, finally loses faith. They realize the reserve currency is backed by nothing but broken promises and an unpayable mountain of debt. A global bank run ensues. Nations dump the old currency, retreating to hard assets, or the emerging currency of the new challenger. Once the exorbitant privilege of the reserve currency is lost, the declining empire experiences a terrifying, hyperinflationary collapse. The standard of living plummets overnight. The global order undergoes a massive, painful restructuring. The wheel turns, crushing the old era into the dirt, and a new empire officially takes the throne, beginning the cycle all over again. I tell you all of this not to drown you in despair, but to arm you with the ultimate weapon: perspective. The cycle is ruthless, and it is entirely indifferent to your feelings, but it is also deeply predictable. By understanding where we are on this historical timeline, you can stop reacting with blind panic to every terrifying headline. You can strategically protect your wealth, safeguard your family, and position yourself not just to survive the coming storm, but to thrive in the new world that will emerge from its wreckage. The old world is ending, but your story is not. The rise and fall of empires is not a series of random, isolated tragedies. It is a profound, predictable rhythm of human history. As we have explored through the phases of the big cycle, the journey from a hungry, disciplined nation to a decadent, deeply divided, and ultimately collapsing empire follows a tragic but recognizable blueprint. It begins with raw grit and a collective sacrifice that builds undeniable greatness and immense wealth. However, that very wealth eventually breeds a toxic complacency, replacing the desire to produce with an insatiable need to consume. As the economic engine pivots from manufacturing to financialization, and governments turn to infinite debt and money printing, the reality for the average citizen silently deteriorates. This financial strain inevitably fractures society into warring ideological tribes, destroying institutional trust. Finally, blinded by internal chaos and crippled by an unpayable burden, the incumbent power is unseated by a disciplined, rising competitor, resetting the global order. Watching this unfold can feel deeply unsettling, especially when we recognize the undeniable symptoms in our modern world. But this cycle is not a death sentence. It is a map. History's ultimate truth is that no empire lasts forever, but humanity endures. The destruction of the old order is simultaneously the birth of the new, bringing unprecedented opportunities for those who are prepared, observant, and resilient enough to navigate the transition. The deepest lesson history offers here is that external stability is always temporary, but internal resilience is permanent. You cannot control macroeconomic cycles, the debasement of fiat currency, or the shifting of global superpowers. However, you can entirely control your own microeconomy and personal character. To apply this to your life today, first, aggressively step away from the cultural outrage and political echo chambers that historically distract citizens while their wealth is quietly drained. Second, focus on producing real value rather than merely consuming. Cultivate hard, tangible skills that are universally needed, regardless of which nation holds the reserve currency. Third, protect your purchasing power. Because dying empires always inflate their debt away, you must educate yourself on diversifying your wealth out of declining fiat currencies and into hard, scarce assets that cannot be printed out of thin air. Lastly, build a strong, localized community of trusted individuals. When institutional trust inevitably collapses, your immediate network becomes your most vital safety net. Which of the 4 phases of the big cycle do you think our current society is in right now? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. I would genuinely appreciate reading your perspective, and it creates a fantastic discussion for everyone to learn from. If you found value in this video, please hit the subscribe button. Your support truly gives me the motivation to keep researching and creating more high-quality content like this for you.